Hello and welcome to Crunchy Stewardship. My name is Chrissy Rombach.
And my name is Katie Fiola Jones. We are two cousins who are passionate about learning and sharing knowledge to equip others to steward their spiritual, mental, emotional, financial, and physical health in order to honor God in every aspect of their lives.
In this podcast, we are taking a deep dive into what it means to steward our lives as God originally intended for us with the resources that God has given us. We will look at topics like food, medicine, finances, mental health, and tons more through a natural lens and with a biblical foundation.
But before we get started in our episode today, if you have been enjoying our podcast, please go and subscribe. And would you consider leaving us a 5-star rating? It really does help other people to find our show in the future. And if you aren't already signed up for our weekly newsletter, go ahead and take a moment right now to do that by clicking the link in the show notes. So today, though, we are going to talk a little bit about gardening. It is honestly an area of the whole journey, I would say the whole crunchy journey that often comes up for so many of us because I think we've talked about this in the past, that a lot of times we get into the crunchy journey with food first. And that's why when we first started this podcast, we actually had our initial episode all on the topic of food. And we've talked about food in almost every one of our episodes. Like it just always comes up. And I find that so many of us, myself included, go down this crunchy journey and we're just kind of like, okay, we want to find the best food to feed our families. Well, when we switch to organic or when we start switching to healthier options, it tends to be really, really expensive or just moderately more expensive than what we're used to, especially if we tend to do all the conventional stuff. And so switching and getting to healthier foods can be a little bit more expensive. But the best way to combat that is to start growing as much of it as you can all by yourself. So then that way you just have some of those initial upfront costs to starting your garden. And then whatever you produce is totally free for you and your family to enjoy. And oftentimes my husband and I have found that we have an overabundance. And so we just start blessing other people by giving away tons of tomatoes because last year we had way too many tomatoes to make enough tomato soup and everything with. It was kind of crazy. But yeah, that's kind of how, I started gardening a little bit before I became kind of crunchy and really into healthy foods. But I really dove into it once I started learning, like, okay, this is the best way to get organic, nutrient-dense produce for our family. So yeah, now we're kind of at a place where we can't garden at this very moment, but I am really looking forward to getting to garden very soon. And I am like dying because all I want to do is garden. And we're buying all of our produce that we can from like farmers markets and the grocery store and stuff, which is great. We're still able to get local produce, but it's just a little bit more expensive. How about you, Chrissy? What is your experience with gardening?
Um, Quite limited, especially compared to yours. I remember last summer, your entire backyard was like a full, like stair-stepped garden with raised beds everywhere, and your foster daughters helped you with the gardening, and it was beautiful. And I loved watching it, just seeing you guys do all the soil prep together and just how excited they got about gardening and watching everything grow and everything.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a bit of an over exaggeration. I think we definitely had a really awesome garden. It wasn't as maybe bountiful in our yard as maybe you remember, but it was magical. We did have a lot.
I remember 3 steps with at least 6 raised beds.
Yeah, I'll have to post a picture of our garden. So the garden itself was actually like over on the side. You aren't mistaken. We did have like a tiered backyard, the way that our yard was sloped, and so it had like these mini retaining walls that were basically just steps. And yes, we did have our chickens out there, but the garden itself, like our actual vegetable garden, was off to the side behind another fence. And I think we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 beds and then a row of like felt pots that had some other like herbs and stuff. And then we actually had
Got
herbs
it.
in our front yard as well. So, but yes, you are not mistaken in that we had the tiered backyard. So you're just
Uh,
visually, spatially not putting the raised beds in the right places.
Well, blame it on your mom for taking a picture of your entire backyard and saying, "Look at the gardens," and me seeing
Yes,
the tiered beds and thinking that was the gardens.
totally, totally.
Anyways, so in terms of my life and gardening, it is much more limited, mostly honestly just from the financial perspective that gardening sometimes does require, well, gardening does require that little bit of upfront cost, especially if you don't already have raised beds in your yard, or if you don't have good soil, you have to buy the soil, you have to make the beds or buy the beds. You have to buy the seeds and then actually care for them, which has a lot of time aspect implemented into that. So, unfortunately, from that financial perspective, Max and I have not actually started gardening yet. The extent that we have is I have a little small, like maybe 2 foot by 4 inch little tray that has a bunch of herbs in it. So I have, well, it started with basil, rosemary, thyme, and oregano. Now it's just basil, rosemary, and thyme because the oregano threw a fit and is no more. But that's just how it goes, you know? So I do have that, and I am currently trying my absolute darndest to keep it alive because I can't figure it out. I did not inherit my mother's green thumb. And, but with that, I do plan on next year at least starting with a raised bed of some sort, just a very small one. We are moving to an apartment, and so my outdoor space is going to be limited to a balcony, not even a patio with a yard, a balcony. And so, but with this move, our cost of living is going down, and I'm getting a new job, which means I'm getting a very tiny pay bump. So, with that, we will have a little bit more money to be able to devote to improving our health and our wellness and actually finally taking those bigger steps towards, yeah, just like doing crunchy things, which I love. So next year, I definitely plan on starting the gardening.
Yeah, that's exciting. I'm excited for you. Before we keep going on gardening, why don't we take a really random tangent and why don't you update everybody about your new job?
My life, yes, my life. So I am phasing out of the hospital. I've been working at the hospital for 2.5 years now, and 12-hour shifts are not great. And I want my evenings back, and I want my mornings back, and I want my weekends back. And so I am moving to home health. I'm going to be working a regular salary position, 9 to 5, but less time if I want it to be because it's very flexible and it sounds phenomenal. So I actually have 3 shifts left at the hospital at this point that we are recording this episode. And I'm very excited to finally have my weekends and my evenings back and like have a consistency to my schedule. And I think I have a theory with that I'll actually be able to garden more so because with 12-hour shifts, it's really hard to remember to water things every single day, which I think might be why my basil and rosemary is having such a hard time right now.
I actually, sorry, this is so random because you just, like, I'm just remembering that you said that basil is hard. I learned that basil can actually be overwatered, and that's how I was killing my basil all the time because I left it outside and it got too much rain and too much sun because basil actually likes a little bit more shade or and not as much heat. It's so anyway.
Yeah,
But
I'm learning that because this past week in particular, I was working a bunch and it rained a bunch like 2 weeks ago. So we had like a full week of rain 2 weeks ago. And then I was working like that whole time. So it got overwatered with all the rain. And then last week we got a huge heat wave, and so it was like 103 degrees for 3 days in a row. And I kept my basil on the side of the house that had midday to evening sun. So, like, literally 9 hours of just blazing sun next to a
Mm-hmm.
window where it probably had the heat reflecting from the window. So, I'm confident that's probably why my basil is sad right now. But
Yeah,
it's okay. It's
that's
getting better. I moved it.
that's definitely it. I did not know that before, and I had those little pots that or I guess they weren't little. They were pretty big felt pots that we had at our last house, and I had a bunch of different herbs and spices and things in there. And I had two different basil plants, and they were both doing very poorly. And then I went to the farmer's market and I bought a new basil plant from a guy there, and I was like, man, I'm really sad. I had two that I got from somebody else, and I just, mentioned it to him because he saw that I was buying basil. So I just felt like I had to explain myself to him. And then he gave me the tip that, like, where to plant it, how to plant it. So I ended up actually putting it in a smaller pot by itself that I could keep on our front porch, and I could move it easily. And then I didn't water it that often. He said that you could actually go like a week without watering it as long as it gets like a good full water every now and then, I guess. So yeah, it ended up working out well.
I
I
think that watering schedule definitely depends on the temperature outside
probably,
because Colorado definitely does not get as hot as North Carolina.
yeah, I can imagine. Yeah. Yeah, Colorado. I mean, that's what's so interesting too is that now here I am in Michigan, and it is so different. It is just, I mean, the hots feel a lot hotter, which is so strange because we're up north and
It's
we're
the
like only
humidity.
3 hours from Canada, but it's so stinking humid here that it is like you
Yeah.
go outside and it might only be 80 degrees, but it feels like 90 because it is so sticky outside. And I'm like, not used to that. So I'm sure gardening is going to be very different. The soil here is very, very sandy, whereas in Colorado, it's like more clayey and stuff. So that'll be different.
With the humidity, welcome to the frizzy hair and the 3 p.m. showers.
I have to shower like twice a day, Chrissy, and
Yeah.
oh my gosh.
I mean, growing up in Houston, I definitely understand that. Honestly, I feel like North Carolina is dry in comparison because it gets down to like 70% humidity in the middle of the day as opposed
Oh
to
my
just sticking
gosh.
at 95% humidity all day long. But
Well, the other thing that
anyways.
I've also been needing showers for is this is something I'm excited about is that we are now beach people, Chrissy. We literally live like
Oh,
2
yeah.
minutes from the beach, and so like the bike ride there is like 5 to 7 minutes. So I just like throw Malachi into a burly. We go to the beach almost every day, and so we get super sandy, and Malachi loves throwing sand, which is hilarious, but yeah, we spend a lot of time there. So I'm like, we have to shower, even if we didn't get super sweaty or something. I'm like, we're just covered in sand. But that's a good problem, I think.
This is a lake beach, though, right?
Oh, yeah, so much better than the ocean beaches.
Probably. I don't have very much experience with lake beaches, but I can imagine you don't get like the salt stuck on your skin.
You don't get the salt, and it's not as smelly. I don't know
Mm.
if it's just the beaches we've been to, and it's not all of them, but there are a lot more like stinky things in the ocean, I feel like. And maybe it's just the salt itself just like leaves a different smell in the area. But lake beaches, just lakes in general, they're fresh water, so they're not salty. And they can be dirty because they tend to be around more trees, if you're in like the wooded
Mm.
areas and then stuff from the trees all falls in. So that can make lakes feel much dirtier sometimes, but it just depends. But the lake we're at here is actually pretty nice. And most lakes around here, if they're big enough, are just really beautiful and pristine. So anyway, random tangent, but there's a
That
lot of
makes
water
sense.
here, so that's good for gardening, right?
It is. It's beautiful. You can get your natural water from the lake to water your
Mm-hmm. A lot of
garden.
people out here, so we live in a very rural area too, and so a lot of houses have their own wells, and so you have your own water systems, which actually tends to be better as far as like the cost of gardening because you're not paying for city water, you have your own system. And so like people will just water their yards a ton more and just water their gardens and use a lot more water because it's their own system. And so when they spray it around the yard and stuff, it ends up kind of going back to their wells and stuff. So I've noticed that, and I find that very interesting. But they're like, yeah, we don't pay for it because we have our own well water. And I'm like, wow, I didn't think
Do
about
people
that.
there also collect rainwater? Like, do they have rain barrels? They collect it off the roof for things like that?
That's a good question. In Colorado, I know that the state laws were like you can only collect like so much water because it was basically like illegal to like keep more of it. I don't know
They want you to rely on the city for water so that you can pay the city for
exactly.
water, even though it really doesn't cost the city all that much for water. I
Yeah.
digress.
I don't know here yet. I would venture to guess that it's okay out here to do that. I mean, again, if you're on a well, you're collecting your own water anyway. So I don't see why that would be a problem. I do really want to do that for our chickens. I've
Oh,
seen
yeah.
people create like gutter systems on their chicken coops and collect the water, and then it goes into this little mini filtration system for the chickens. And I'm like, that is so smart. And then you don't have to fill up the water tanks yourselves. And I was just like, that's so smart.
Assuming it rains enough.
It has been raining out here quite a bit. We actually, when we got out here, it rained a lot and it was almost like sad getting out here. There were fires in Canada going on, so there was a ton of smoke. So we got here and it was just really dreary feeling. And then it rained after the smoke cleared up. It rained a ton. And then finally, the last couple, like a week and a half, it's been in the 90s. And I'm like, where are we? This place is so strange. And I'm like, it's so hot and sticky.
It's hot, it's humid, it's cloudy, it's rainy, it's smoky. I don't even know what to think.
It will make like gardening outside a lot more interesting just because it is stickier and stuff. So I'm like, I'm gonna sweat so quickly being out there and like pulling weeds and
Oh,
stuff. But
yeah.
I have learned that one of the best ways to reduce weeds in your garden is doing like a top layer of some sort of mulch or even doing like newspapers or things like that. And that was not something I had tried yet back in Colorado because I had only been gardening for a couple years. I got really into it after our first year of gardening. And then I started learning tons and stuff of like, I started listening to more podcasts and joining Facebook groups and reading books, and all the stuff that I do when I get into something is just, I try to become my own expert on it all of a sudden. And so I learned that, and I definitely want to try that to see if it does help reduce weeds because that is like the worst part about gardening is weeding everything like all the time.
It can be quite cathartic sometimes, though. You know, if you get a good little cushion for your knees, then you just go out there and get in your own little world.
My mother is one of those rare humans on the planet who severely enjoys, and I say severely because it is a weird thing. She very much enjoys weeding, and not only her own garden, but other people's gardens. And so I always remember, like, when we would go to, like, actually, so years ago, when we would come up to Michigan for vacation, we would usually get like a rental house or something. And I literally remember we're on our vacation and my mother is weeding the garden of this rental property that we're at. And I'm like, Mother, come sit down and enjoy yourself. And she's like, I am enjoying myself. And that is just who she is. So now it's not a problem.
It's almost like our moms are sisters.
It's
My mom,
almost like they're sisters.
almost. My mom we would play outside of the backyard all day long. We had a pool in our backyard growing up because that's just, everybody has a pool in their backyard in Houston because it's so stinking hot. And my sisters and I would be playing in the pool all day long, and my mom would go the entire perimeter of the backyard pulling all of the weeds every single day. And then she'd get sweaty, she'd jump in the pool, and then she'd go back to her weeds and keep on weeding. She even has like a little, she's kind of obsessed with frogs because frog stands for forever rely on God. And so all over her garden growing up, she had a bunch of frogs, and she had one in particular that was holding a sign that said, "Free weeds, you pick." And she always told me to pick them, and I said no. She was very good at it.
That is funny. Free weeds. So You mentioned, Chrissy, that you guys right now haven't gotten too much into gardening because it tends to be a little bit more expensive to get into. So I thought I would share a few tips that I have learned on kind of getting into gardening at a lower cost, like some ways that you can start saving money when you get into gardening. Because as I've been getting into this, same thing with many of the topics that we talk about, you can get really overwhelmed with a lot of the like, oh, I need to go in and go big and do all the things, and it can get expensive really quickly. But I've actually found that there are some fun ways to save money where you can. And, you don't want to overspend. We want to be good stewards. We want to honor God with the way that we are, using the resources that He has given us. And one of those ways is to save money, like on things like gardening. And so a couple of the things that I have done is first, utilizing Facebook Marketplace. I literally love Facebook Marketplace, and I have gotten a lot of good gardening things on Facebook myself, including pots, like pots to put plants in, whether they're big pots or small. I've gotten a lot of them from Facebook. Some people actually do sell raised garden beds, whether they are like the wooden ones, and then you just plop them into the ground, or the like trough-based ones that are those kind of trendy looking ones that people have been doing now, that they're like the metal, like feeding trough looking things. Those are kind of cool, and they tend to be more expensive. But the other thing with raised garden beds is that you can kind of make them out of anything. So, I mean, think about like the water trough thing. So if you have something that kind of raises your, like the soil off the ground even a little bit, or helps to like build up, like people have built them out of anything or used lots of different containers to make raised garden beds out of pretty much anything. So I would just kind of recommend like get creative on how you can make a garden bed, a raised garden bed, or something along those lines. And the other way for seeds is actually interesting that I learned, and something that I didn't yet utilize, but I want to try, is that there are Facebook groups that are like seed swaps, but also people will just like kind of give away seeds that are good in your local area. So if you type in on Facebook, like your town, and then like seed swap, or even if you go into certain gardening Facebook groups and just post in there like, hey, I'm a new gardener and I'm looking for a few donations of seeds, you'd be surprised at how many people would be really happy to do that. And the last one for seeds is that libraries, literally, not all of them, I'm not saying that every library does this, but I learned that our library back in Colorado did this. Literally, I learned this as we were leaving. But it's kind of like also a seed swap, but they call it like a seed library. And you come and donate some of your seeds, and then you can pick out a packet of seeds. And again, it's usually seeds that people have grown these plants in their area and they already have done well. And so that's a really great way to get started because it's also for free. And yeah, just like utilizing different things like that.
As you were talking, it kind of made me start thinking of a really easy way to make a raised garden bed is just getting some 2x4s from like Lowe's or something like that and just cutting them and nailing them together and boom, garden bed.
Yeah, actually, so this is like a random story. When Malachi and I were in the hospital, I gave my dad the chore of replacing our garden beds. And I had told him to just fix them, and I thought he was just going to like nail back together some boards, but he literally took out all of the garden beds and made new ones. And so he just used a very simple system of buying 2x4s and these specific cinder blocks that kind of act as like a cornerstone for each of the 2x4s to go into. And he kind of just like nailed down some stakes through these cinder blocks into the ground. And we actually were able to pick all of them up and take them with us here to Michigan. So we have all of the materials to then go and rebuild these. And it takes maybe a few hours of labor just to put them in the ground. And then I guess for us, we already had the soil that kind of went into it. And so we just rebuilt around them. So it would be different if you needed to get the soil. So soil is one of those things, though, that you do want to get good stuff, especially depending on your area, what your ground is like, because the soil that you plant your seeds in, your plants in, can make or break the actual plants themselves. So that is really important. I don't know. There's a lot of science that goes behind the soil, and I have not gotten that far into gardening, but it is something that I do want to learn more about, especially things like composting, because composting can be very, very beneficial to very good nutrient dense produce. And that's what we're really looking for, is getting like the best nutrient dense food for our families.
Yeah, gosh, I just think about like how many banana peels do I throw away every month? Or like how many eggshells do I throw away every day? Because we have eggs for breakfast every day. And especially if you have your own chickens that make the eggs for you, okay, you already know for a fact they're all natural eggshells. And just tossing them. It's so hard.
Well, actually, if you have your own chickens, we don't typically put our own eggshells into the compost bin. We actually feed them directly back to the chickens because chickens need lots of calcium in order to produce more eggshells. And one of the best ways and free ways to do it is to just feed them their own eggshells back. Otherwise, you can buy like oyster shells, like ground up oyster shells and stuff. But usually we just rinse off our eggshells, let them dry out, and then crunch them up, and the chickens gobble them up basically like regular food. And they know exactly that they need this in their diet in order to produce more nice, strong eggshells. Isn't that interesting?
Odd. Didn't you
It
say
is.
before in a previous podcast that your chickens also eat chicken?
Oh, yeah. Chickens are omnivores, so they literally will eat anything. I mean, we had some leftover pulled pork, and I just threw it right into our chicken bowl on the counter that goes out to the chickens because it's like they need it. I mean, they eat bugs, which is a form of meat and protein, right? And so they will eat meat. I don't recommend feeding chickens any raw chicken because it almost promotes cannibalism, because then they're like, oh, this raw chicken is so good. Oh, here's another raw chicken right next to me. And then they would start attacking each other and being like, oh, you taste just like this raw chicken I was fed. At least that's what I've been heard. This has not happened in our chicken coop. We're not crazy. But I have read that when you feed chickens chicken, it's best if it's already cooked, and then they aren't learning to eat their own chickens. Same thing with eggs. Eggs are actually a really good source of protein and fat for chickens. And they really should only be fed to chickens if you've cooked them already. So like when Malachi eats his scrambled eggs and then he throws a bunch of it everywhere, whatever he doesn't eat up usually goes to our chickens as well. Yeah.
Katie, what are your thoughts on hydroponics? Because Max and I have talked a lot about doing that potentially because we've been living in a rental. We're going to be still living in a temporary housing situation for a while. And so putting a garden in the backyard is more difficult, knowing that it's not going to be like a forever place. And hydroponics is really nice. You can just pick it up and move it. But the like store-bought hydroponics, like a tower garden or something like that, is so incredibly expensive. So there are ways to like create hydroponics. But what are your thoughts on that? And especially in terms of like nutrient density for the plants themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the nutrient density because, again, I kind of alluded to it. The soil is really where your fruits and veggies, where any plant derives its nutrients and vitamins and minerals from. So depending on what soil the plant is growing in will equate to the actual nutrients and vitamins that plant is getting. That is why we often see in like conventionally grown crops, those plants tend to be very nutrient deficient because each plant soaks up certain vitamins and minerals like differently. And so you may have heard of things like crop rotating, and where you don't want to always plant the same things in the same spots because corn takes from the soil different things than carrots would, or potatoes or tomatoes. So they both give and take different things from the soil. So it's good to like rotate them. Again, I don't really know all of the specifics on it, but what I do know is then from any kind of hydroponic, which if you're not familiar with what that phrase is, it's basically like growing plants in water and then feeding the nutrients into the water. And then like that's how they grow. It's similar to like a very common one that most people know of are AeroGardens, which I actually started my gardening journey with an AeroGarden that my sister gave me because she had one and then wasn't using it. So I asked her for it as a present and she gifted it to me, which was really nice. So we started our gardening journey years ago. I kind of forgot about that, but that's technically where it started. And we grew some basil and I think cilantro maybe. And then we had some mini bell peppers, which was actually really fun. It was really hard to grow successfully in those, especially the bell peppers, but the basil did pretty well. But what I have been learning recently is that you wouldn't get the same nutrient density as you would in compost-rich soil. And so a lot of people are kind of against it because of that. However, I do think it has its place. Like for some, like a couple like you, Chrissy, where that's your only option potentially, that could be a good way to get started in making your own produce that is organic versus getting stuff from the grocery store that is going to be more expensive. It might be interesting for you to do like a cost breakdown because I know I've looked into some of those systems, those really cool towers they actually look really beautiful, but they are so expensive. And so I'm like, it just never made sense for us, especially because we had a yard. So I'm like, there's not really any point unless I'm really into like doing it year round and needing to do it in the winter inside. But I mean, even at that, it just never made sense for us. But what is interesting, just my last thought on it, is that I know that there are a lot of people who are trying to fight against some like big commercial hydroponic systems because technically your produce at the grocery store that are labeled organic could be coming from those hydroponic commercial farms. And they don't technically have to label that on your organic foods. And so here we are as, quote unquote, smart consumers switching to the organic options because we want that more nutrient dense food that doesn't have the pesticides in it, but yet we might not be getting the same form of nutrients because it's not grown in soil, it's grown in the hydroponics, so there's a big fight right now against it. And there's like a new certification that hopefully will come out in the next few years that would be regenerative farmed food, which would be your traditional way that you think of farming. No GMOs, no pesticides, no hydroponics, just straight in the soil with good, rich compost. So that's one of the things I've been hearing a little bit of rumors about is just like people don't like that because it's not as nutrient dense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know there's you definitely do have to add the nutrients to the water and you test the water every day to make sure the nutrients are still good. But then you have to ask the question of where are you getting your water from? The hose? Or are you getting it rainwater or well water? And so that's all going to be different. Max and I actually did do a cost breakdown analysis of hydroponics a year or so ago. We really thought we were going to do it, and then we started doing it and it just didn't continue, unfortunately. But yeah, so we're going to create our own by essentially taking 5-gallon buckets and putting the 5-gallon buckets on top of each other and then using PVC pipes to kind of pipe the water through the buckets and then putting holes on the sides of the buckets to have the plants kind of go into in order to allow the water to run over their roots and everything like that. And I think the cost breakdown with the buckets and the PVC and the motor was less than $200, which was not horrendous, but then the actual buying of the nutrients and testing the nutrients frequently and getting the roots of the plants to a place where you could put them in the hydroponics was the more difficult piece. So that never really actually ended up happening for us. Even though we had it all laid out on paper, we had a really great plan. It just was not executed very well.
Yeah. And I would probably, if anyone is ever considering doing this, I would hope that they have nutrient options that are organic But then you think about it, I don't know, is it like a synthetic nutrient, or is it like where are they sourcing that from? So there's a lot that I would
They catch it from the air. They take a
they
bottle
can.
into the air and catch the nitrogen from the air.
Yay. I don't know how
Actually,
that
I have
all
no idea. I
works.
just made that up.
I like it. I like the idea of just like, wish I'm catching the nitrogen. Oh,
That's funny. So, when I was doing some research on gardening, because as we have learned, I don't know very much on gardening. So of course I had to do some research before preparing for this episode. And I actually found an app that is super helpful for gardening help. It is called Grow It, and it's not expensive. It's only about $40 a year for a subscription. And it's the kind of app where you can take a picture of your plant that you have growing. So for me right now, basil. I took a picture of my basil and it came up with like a full health analysis of my plant and told me exactly what was causing the yellowing and the wilting of the leaves and ways that I could fix it. One thing interesting that it recommended that I thought was just crazy was apparently like wilting of the leaves can sometimes be caused by nutrient deficiency. And they said one way that you can create your own natural fertilizer for like smaller areas is making a peanut butter water. So putting a little bit of peanut butter in like 50 times as much water and mixing it up until the peanut butter like dissolves in there. And then watering your plants with that for like a day or so. The phosphorus from the peanuts, I guess, like soaks into the soil and can help the roots. So this morning I did it, and not gonna lie, my basil looks way better this afternoon than it did when I woke up this morning. So I'm gonna say it works, but that is after only one day of observing it. But this app is also really cool that you can plan your beds. And so you can like section out your beds in different sections and say, okay, I want to put tomatoes here and then carrots here and cucumbers in this corner. And it will tell you whether or not those plants are good neighbors or bad neighbors. And so one thing I learned is like, you don't want to plant carrots next to onions because then your carrots are going to taste oniony. And so,
wow.
yeah, so it like tells you whether or not your plants are going to help each other or if they'll hurt each other by being next to each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because again, like certain plants have different benefits. I've heard a lot of like, oh, you should plant these certain things underneath this type of plant, like that grows really tall because this one puts out a lot of this specific mineral into the soil, and this type of plant really needs that. And so it's kind of like doing that whole switching up your garden beds, but while you're actually gardening. There is a phrase for that. I'll have to look it up. But again, as I've kind of learned more and more, there's a lot of people who educate on these kinds of things. I do want to take like a course or something online. I love becoming kind of my own expert and getting really good at the things that I'm really passionate about. And this is one of those hobbies that I'm like, this is not only just a hobby, but it's a way that I can feed our family really good food. And so I do want to take it more seriously, especially as we are here in Michigan and looking for property. Like we want to have a couple of acres in order to have more chickens and potentially I would love to have goats one day. I don't know how realistic that is, but we would love to do that. And we want to raise our own turkeys for Thanksgiving dinner. And we want to do it all, but have a big garden. Like that is one of my goals, is to get into gardening. And hopefully one day Malachi would get really passionate about it as well and can be my little helper. That's what I envision. I won't force him into it. I keep telling Wes, I'm not going to force him to do anything. But if he just happens to love gardening and not sports, that's okay with me. But I don't know. We'll see about that.
That's great. Have you ever tried an app or something to kind of guide you in your gardening?
I have not well, I guess I used one a while ago that helped me decipher what plant was what, and it would tell you different things, kind of similar to what you're saying. Like it would give you recommendations, and I cannot remember the name of it, but one that sounds similar to what you're talking about, where it can help you plan out your garden beds and everything, is called Seed Time. Now, what's interesting is that one of my really good friends, who is also a money coach, Bob Loddick, his company is actually called Seed Time, but then his is more Seed Time Money. And this app that helps you plan out your garden and everything is, I think it's just Seed Time. Seed Time Living, maybe? It might have something different. But anyway, don't get those two mixed up because they are both Seed Time. But this app, it's also like a computer program, so you can do it all from your computer. I see ads about it from influencers and different educators in the gardening world that I really trust. And so I feel like that one is probably really good because I know that these other people that I trust also use it. And so I have not used it, so I can't vouch for it or tell you anything. I've looked at it before, but you also have to pay for it. So I'm like, I'm not at that place yet where I need to utilize this. So maybe one day we'll check it out. But if anybody has recommendations like that, like an app that they've used or a program that they've taken to teach them more about gardening, or a book even, like I love books. And so if anybody has recommendations like that, please let us know. Join us over at our Facebook page, Crunchy Christian Mamas on a Budget. Come join us over there. Let us know what you're using. Let us know if you are a gardener. I mean, are you gardening and what are you gardening? And yeah, even if you have a garden, I'd love to see garden pics. This is a really random thing. Maybe it's not that random if you know me, but when I was recovering from all of our hospital stuff after Malachi was born, one of my favorite things to do was watch garden tours on YouTube. Like, I would watch these hour-long garden tours. Like, people would create full episodes of their beautiful laid-out gardens. And I still have tons saved in my watch in the future list or whatever. And it's just one of those random things about me. I have not watched one in a while, but I'm just remembering that I should go watch some to get some inspiration of what I want my garden to look like in the future. That's funny.
I'm definitely one that's guilty of rubbernecking when someone has a really nice garden in their front yard. I'm like, ooh, oh, maybe I should stay in the right lane.
I think,
But
honestly, if they have a really beautiful garden, I think people want others to see it. At least I would. Like, if I put so much work into having this gorgeous garden, if someone was like, gawking over my fence to look at it, I'd be like, yeah, that's right. My garden is awesome. Come look at my garden over the fence. That sounds creepy, but
that is creepy. I'm not that creepy. I just drive past the house a little bit slower.
Oh, too good.
But anyways, with these apps that we've mentioned, we'll make sure to put links to them in the description box so you guys can take a look at them. I also have not purchased this app. I merely just downloaded it for the 7-day free trial so I could look at it before talking about it on here. But I like it. So when I actually start gardening, I might actually pay for it. But until next time, Katie, do you have any other final closing thoughts that you want to add?
I don't think so. I think we covered as much as we could today. Maybe we'll talk more about gardening as we become more expertise at it.
Cool. I love it. Well, we pray over each and every one of you guys, and we hope that these episodes can be helpful for you in your journey to becoming a better steward of your body, your mind, your soul, your spirit, your finances, and your families. And we're praying that this episode was helpful for you, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.